Well, howdy doody do to you. It's time for Social Movements lesson number 6. Some learning goals. You're going to know what deprivation theory is. It's the idea that people form social movements because they feel deprived in some way. And you're going to know some problems with this theory, which is they only really deal with social movements of deprivation, not justice. Spoiler alert. And you're also going to be able to analyze how social movements come into being. I'm sure you're getting bored of analyzing, but it's all good because you must be getting so good at it, you're finding these activities really quick to do. All right, deprivation theory. It says that social movements come from the disadvantaged, such as the poor, or those with low socioeconomic status, which just kind of means poor but also low class or got a difficult physical labour job, whatever. Not a lot of social capital. And they feel deprived of opportunities, status, wealth, all that stuff. It's a pre-1960s theory in the sense that it tries to explain social movements from before the 1960s. As you can see, it's often based on economic issues, and it's about relative deprivation. The difference between relative and absolute deprivation. So let me give you an example. Absolute poverty would be living on less than $2 a day. Relative poverty would be someone who's on the dole in Australia. They are poor relative to other Australians, but they're not poor in an absolute sense because they're getting way more money than a poor person in Asia or Africa or somewhere gets if they only earn $2 a day. Yeah, just like with deprivation. Deprivation, whether you feel deprived, is a relative thing. I feel, I don't feel like I deserve $5 million a year, so I don't feel deprived of it. Maybe I feel like I deserve 70 grand a year, so if I'm only earning 10 grand a year, then I'll feel deprived. And I feel deprived in relation to other people. So Australia is a high wage economy, so I would expect to earn a decent wage living here because the other people around me are, yeah? It's about how deprived I feel compared to others, the whole keeping up with the Jones thing. It's all about feeling like you aren't getting what you're entitled to. So here's a little graph that explains relative deprivation theory. Yeah? So it's basically the gap between what you expect and what you get. Now, if you've ever had a strict parent, they tell you you get what you get, and you don't get upset. Anyway, there's an interesting correlation between this and happiness. It's the idea that you can't control what you actually get. All you can control is your expectations. So if you keep your expectations low, then even if you don't get that much, you're never going to be bummed out. Anyway, relative deprivation is about expecting to get rewards but not getting them. That's just showing the same thing. Yep. There are problems with deprivation theory. It's not really that common these days, or at least it doesn't explain a lot of things. The first one is that, well, not everybody who feels deprived starts a social movement. Heaps of people have felt deprived. I feel deprived. You don't see me starting a social movement. So deprivation theory doesn't explain why those people haven't started a social movement. Also, it's kind of a bit circular because the only way that you can prove that there was any deprivation in the first place is that a social movement was started by that group. It's got a limited scope, therefore. It only focuses on inequality and specifically economic inequality. It doesn't really explain social justice movements, and that's why deprivation theory was big before the 60s, because the 60s saw a huge amount of social movements about trying to change social movements based on social justice issues. Here's a little slide telling what deprivation theory is. So it's a theory that states people join social movements because they feel deprived. And it's all about relative deprivation. There you go. I know you can read. Right. I want you to analyze how social movements begin. Again, there's your definition of analyze. Deprivation theory suggests people start social movements because they feel deprived in some way. Now, I want you to analyse this idea. So here's some dot points to get you started. So here's a little diagram. Yeah, that's our little analysis diagram where we split something up into parts and explain how the parts together make the whole. It doesn't need to be 3. I just always use 3. You could do 2 or 4, whatever. So it's the gap between what you expect and what you get. Some people feel entitled to things. It's very relative, not absolute. 2 groups with the same conditions won't feel the same. The feeling of missing out is increasing. So I want you to take any 2 or 3 of these and explain the links between them. I want that to be like a short paragraph. Or there's another one. And there's another one. So you got a few to choose from there. Oh, there you go. Take 3 of them and analyse the links between all 3. If you're finding this way too hard, try just taking 2. Let's watch a video. It's Defying Social Norms for Social Change. This guy's very cool.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. So I guess university is one of the few normal things that I really ever do, and every time that I'm at university, which is quite rare, I'm meant to be in class right now as a matter of fact, my friends and my peers constantly remind me of how I'm actually not that normal, and I seem to be living in this little bubble of mine, this little bubble where I think that everything I do is normal, but evidently not so. Many of you would probably remember when you were a teenager, when you were a child, or maybe even now, we always seem to be striving towards normality. Not because we want to be like everyone else and we want to be boring and dull, but because we want to fit in. So being normal is absolutely fine. And the reason why I said I feel like I'm normal is when I was speaking to my friends about speaking at TEDx Christchurch, I was talking to them about defying social norms, and that was what I thought I was going to be speaking about, etc., etc. And all of the things that they thought that they were defying in terms of social norms, so caring about politics was something that came up quite often, wanting to make a difference in the world, they kept suggesting all these things. And I was like, these are things that I'm doing too. So doesn't that make us normal? Because, you know, it's both of us that want this thing. But then as I spoke to people on the streets, at bus stops and places of random where you don't expect to be approached by some crazy girl asking you, what do you think you're doing differently in your life? I started to realise that that I wasn't actually too normal, and I really was living in this bubble. So I guess today I'm going to be speaking to you a bit about why defying social norms is quite an important thing if we want to create social change to solve some of the big problems that we're facing. So whether that be climate change, global poverty, stereotypes that currently exist which are negative, etc. Now, I didn't want to be that girl that was known for coming to a TEDx event and trying to define exactly what social norms were and making this definitive list of what I thought everyone was actually like. I won't lie, I did do some research. Someone recently brought me stuff white people liked. So I was reading through it and I was like, yeah, I see some of this, like I'm maybe that, maybe not that. And you'll all be happy to know that you are normal in some way, or at least white, if you will. Number 134 in the website/book is liking TED conferences. So I think you all fit that bill just fine. But moving on from that. So I didn't want to be the girl that defined social norms, not because obviously being someone that's not normal, I didn't quite know what it was, but also because everyone has quite a different perception of what social norms are. Yes, social norms are values and beliefs that all of us hold because society tells us almost what to think through the media, but primarily through our families actually. From the moment that we're born, our families expect various things from us. Our parents expect for us to grow up happy. Some parents expect their children to marry, have children so that they can consider themselves grandparents, or going to university to become an investment banker, a doctor, or whatever. Every family places some sort of expectations, which I guess are the basis of how social norms are formed for each and every individual. Now, my parents fortunately weren't alike many Asian parents who have that stereotypical, you should be a doctor, lawyer, or accountant, or anything like that. My parents were, I guess, a bit more general about what they felt I should be doing. So I went along through my childhood living a rather normal life until I was faced with a fork path. I couldn't really find a picture of a fork path, so just lots of forks. And I even brought a fork on stage to demonstrate my next point, if I can get it out of my pocket. So I guess I was going down the straight and narrow, like everything was fine. I was going through primary school, high school, and then I was faced with the decision when I was maybe 15, 16, when people started to ask me, what is it that you want to do with the rest of your life? And I thought about it. There were so many different options that I had. It wasn't because I lacked opportunity or lacked a choice, but I thought, what is it that I want to do? Do I want to go down path A, which is a prong A on this fork, which was, go to university, graduate, do some graduate program, and then get a job? Or did I want to go down B, marry really young, have children? Did I want to go down C, do some other thing that I guess was quite typical, something that other people had done before me, something that would have been quite easy for me to emulate in that, oh, that person's already done it and they got to this result by the end of it. And that wasn't necessarily what I wanted. I still don't quite know the answer to the question, so please don't ask me. But I sort of know that what I want to do is essentially create social change in some way in society. And for me, there's no clear path towards creating social change. How does someone go about creating social change? I'm at university now, I am studying, but I'm not studying a Bachelor of Social Change, or there aren't any after-school courses that I could have taken whilst I was in high school. So instead, I guess what I embarked upon essentially was a web. It wasn't really a straight and narrow. It wasn't something that had been done before. It was different. It was this web of social change that I was, I guess, going down. It was something that I have no idea and still have no idea about exactly what I'm doing. And this all started with that campaign that was mentioned before, Change a Million Light Bulbs. Essentially, I set out to change a million light bulbs, convert incandescent lights into fluorescent lights. You could say that it was successful. We did change a million light bulbs. We managed to get some laws changed as well. And it was just a bizarre process because when I was doing this, my one aim was I wanted to change the light bulbs. I didn't quite realize at the time, I was 15, what social change I would be creating, let alone what social norms I was defying. I don't even think I knew what social norms were until I started studying literature at university, and the term was just thrown around all the time. And it's not until I really look back now and I think, there were some norms that I was defying for the fact that I was so young. I was 15 at the time. I don't think anybody, and that included teachers and parents and friends and peers and the like, even though they were extremely supportive, expected me as a 15-year-old girl to go out and change a million light bulbs. No one expected that of me. No one expected that I would do it in the way that I did, which was primarily through online networks, through word of mouth and things like that. It was a different form of communication. It was one that I guess the older generations, like Generation X, the baby boomers, which my parents are from, weren't too aware about. They were like, what's this online thing? What's social media? What's Facebook? But that was what we used because they were our target audience, young people, people that were my age as well, convincing them that they could create change. Now, one of the reasons why I was able to do this so young was because I didn't really, I guess, fall into this belief that you need some sort of qualification in order to create social change. You don't need to have finished high school, you don't need to have gone to university or graduated and things like that. And that's why there are so many other young people out there now, and I could give you a million examples from people I know back in Australia who've created Make Poverty History concerts with over 50,000 people attending at the age of 18, running massive national advocacy campaigns in their country on poverty, on climate change, on other social issues. And it's because we don't think that we need a qualification. Maybe it's because none of us are terribly smart and doing well at university. But we have this, I guess, belief in ourselves, something that we've carried on from our childhoods. We haven't lost that inhibition yet. We haven't gotten to the point where we think that we need to conform to what society expects of us. We don't think that we need to have done A, B, and C in order to get to D. We can get from A to D through other means. And that's what I mean when I say that I've gone down this web to get to social change as opposed to a fork where it's not on the straight and narrow. And social change is something that is also hard to define, equally as hard as defining what social norms is. Because who can say what is good social change and what's negative social change? All I do know is that if we don't change the ways that we are, if we just conform to everything that people expect of us and the like, then nothing in society will change because we'll be the same. If I did do everything that people expected of me, then what would actually be different from everyone that has come before me and everyone that will come after me that does the same? And I think that's just, I guess, one of the integral points of dedicating a life towards social change, in that that's defying a major social norm of the fact that in order to create social change, you have to challenge the status quo, and that in itself is creating some form of change, whether positive or negative. The reason why a lot of young people now are deciding to not only fix the problems, or attempt to fix the problems rather, of climate change and global poverty, but the reason why we're defying these social norms is because we don't want to just fix the problems, we want to change the system. People have often said that climate change is a byproduct of a bigger issue of sustainability and of the way that we're living our lives. If we just solve climate change, then what's to say that in 20 years that problem won't occur again because the system is still the same? And this is why defying social norms is important, because it changes the system. It changes the paradigms, the constructs, the ways that we're taught to think in, because there's nothing necessarily right about these paradigms. These are paradigms that we've constructed ourselves, so it's just as easy for us to change. And lastly, I'd like to end on the fact that even though I know I've used a lot of young examples and been all, I'm 19, I'm still a teenager, not to make you feel bad, not to make you feel bad. I didn't introduce myself as the 19-year-old. I said the almost 20, is that people aren't born with the ability to defy social norms or to create social change. It's not something that you're born with. It's not a talent that I've been blessed with. It's a conscious decision that I've made. And it's a conscious decision that each and every one of you can make as well. It's essentially looking at your life and thinking there's A and there's B. B is what everyone else is doing. B is what people expect me to do, but is B necessarily right? So I encourage you all to think about the A option and maybe go with that, and hopefully we can all create some social change together. Thank you.
Now, out there, you'll often hear the sociological theory called deprivation theory, relative deprivation theory. So there you go. Deprivation theory, relative deprivation theory. That's the same thing.
So now let's talk about relative deprivation theory. So relative deprivation is a type of poverty. It's when you feel poor in comparison to others. Typically with relative deprivation, someone is in a position of economic disadvantage, but they can see how others are doing well financially, and they feel deprived because they don't have the same level of material success that another person has. So crime occurs when the wealthy and the poor live close to one another. And the reason for that is because the poor can see people doing much better than them. And so they know it's attainable. They know that it is possible to live better. They know that it is possible to have more. But they feel deprived. And when they can see others doing well, then this causes resentment. And this resentment culminates in criminal behavior. So there's sharp divisions between the rich and the poor, which creates distrust and envy. But interestingly enough, oftentimes when people are committing crimes in a community that borders a more affluent one, they don't always cross over into the more wealthy neighborhood to rob or break the law. Oftentimes they prey upon the people living in their own neighborhood. So there's a point on your slide here that says that criminals are motivated by perceived humiliation and in turn feel the right to humiliate their victim, usually poor people. So they feel deprived, they're angry, they're bitter, they're resentful, but they know that there are consequences if they victimize people who have more. So they turn that rage and that humiliation on their neighbors and they victimize them instead, typically other poor people.
This is also about relative deprivation, but I couldn't think of a fun title for it, so yeah, it's just some lady rambling about it. That's not to be disrespectful to ladies rambling at all, sorry.
Peggy Redmond says, I'm looking at the 5 preconditions for relative deprivation, which include number 4, thinking the possession of X is feasible. And then looking at the chart, the flow chart, about what leads people who feel relative deprivation to political activism. Aren't people who find their opportunities blocked, experiencing something other than relative deprivation. How can something be feasible and unattainable? So this is a reference to, there's 2 sections in that Crosby article where you talk about the 5 preconditions. You have to have all 5 to feel relative deprivation. Once you have relative deprivation, then we go through these different paths. Is it, are you internally focused or externally focused? Are you, what's the next one? Do you feel, no, I'm forgetting. No, interpunitive, extrapunitive is the first one. Piece of it. Yeah. I can't remember. All right, whatever. But anyway, there's the efficacy piece, and do you think things are feasible? But the opportunities blocked or open. Yeah. So I think there's 2 different issues here. I think these are separate. So is something feasible? So that's the 5 preconditions for relative deprivation. That refers to, let's just use the example. What example should we use? We could use the example of gay marriage. That's the one I used in the lecture. So if we think that it's possible to change the laws so that gay people can get married, if we think that the political climate is such that that is a reasonable goal, then we can be discontent with what's happening and agitate for those rights. So we will develop this negative emotion around the fact that my group is unfairly deprived of something. Once we've done that, are we going to internally focus or externally focus? And if we're externally focused and we see opportunities are blocked or open, that's where the question comes. If opportunities are open, so we see that other states have allowed this to happen, or that there's a sympathetic court or something like a sympathetic legislature or something like that, then we can go through. But if opportunities are blocked, then we might say this opportunities might be blocked in a way where we say, like, okay, it's not going to happen in my state, or it's not going to happen in my community. That's different than the feeling of relative deprivation. That's, you're feeling discontent because you think in general we can do this, but then we're talking about in the particular situation, can we change it or not? And I'm not going to defend everything in this article because I think it's a little convoluted, and there's some aspects of this do overlap, and I think you're picking up on that. There's some overlap between some of these components. But anyway, does anybody want to?
I think in terms of the feasibility, it's also a recognition that this is practical for me to attain, and yes, there are conditions, and that's where the next piece of it comes about how one may kind of orient themselves based on whether they have opportunities to make or to not make change, but to recognize that it is feasible, but there's something about the way in which the system is set up that is preventing me from attaining this.
That was very well put. Thank you, Kavita.
Thank you. And yeah, so that's what I had to say about that.
Do you want to add anything?
Right, like I think that the issue with it being feasible is, like, if you are somebody, just to stay with the same example, who lived like in a southern state long before gay marriage was passed, you would never have even thought about trying to pass it. Like, that's what it means by it's just not feasible. You never saw anybody try to change it. You don't even think that the laws could be changed. And you need to be able to see some sort of opening to feel truly deprived of something.
Right, right.
And yeah, just to add about being in one particular place or the other, like Loretta Ross said, and you probably watched that little video, it's she said something about how we're all spread over all the boxes, so it's not that simple to categorize and put a person in a box. A person may be internally focused, that is harmful for them, but is externally but is also externally focused, as in the case of Ross, actually, she mentions a time when she was engaging in self-harm, but she was also part of these, she was part of a women's rights organization, and she was doing organizing work around that. So yes, it's, it's
They're
complicated.
Messy. Yeah, the theories are messy, and I know we're finishing up right now. Feel free to talk about these complications and think about the ways the theories fit together and overlap. That'll be in the next week's readings, actually, about how all these theories fit together. But if you want to think about that and ask questions about that, you can talk about that on the discussion board, and I think we have another live meeting. We can also deal with those questions then as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks, Kavita. Thanks, Maya. I actually have to go to class. You might have to do that too.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us, and keep writing things on the discussion boards, and we'll look forward to the next live meeting with you. So thanks.
I want to take you back to your primary school days, and you're going to do a sense poem, okay? So, topic being social change. When you see social change, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? And what do you taste? Complete those 5 sentences for the topic social change sense poem. I know it sounds eggy, and maybe it is, but you're gonna do it. Homework times. Read the relevant pages from as a textbook, and I want you to spend 15 minutes on the vocab quiz as we do once a week. bit.ly/year 12 sociology words. Rad. Merci beaucoup pour taking part in this lesson. Keep it real.